you're doing it. There we go. Are you in your own group?
Oh.
Okay, so listen up here. We're starting a new chapter. Today is the only day we're spending on chapter 21. This is different than stuff you've done before. You don't have to go home and read all of chapter 21. That's a little much. What you have to know is what I talk about today. So you can mark places in your book maybe that I talk about. Maybe that'll help. Maybe you can watch this video again. That'll help. I'm going to put it online. I don't know. Whatever you can do, take notes. To get what I talk about today, that would be good. Does it make sense? Mm-hmm. Do you want to start filming, or have you started yet?
I have.
You've already started?
Yeah.
Good for you. Now, you're going to focus up on this, right? Because I'm going to talk about that, right? And if you ever find that you need to focus on me, you're going to turn the camera toward me, right?
Right.
So you don't just leave it in one spot. Good deal. Thank you, Nick. There's some people, I'm not sure what they're doing. There's some other picture that's probably somewhat important. What protists are? We're in Kingdom Protista. So, remember there were 3 domains. Who knows the domains? Raise your hand. Can you remember the 3 domains? No? You're kind of going halfway over there. Cam, did you know? What are the 3 domains? Bacteria, archaea, and domain eukarya. Now, if you remember, these 2 right here, those were prokaryotic cells. What's prokaryotic mean?
Singular cellular.
Nope.
Without it in.
No nucleus. Actually, you can think of it as prekaryotic. Karyo means nucleus, pre meaning before. Somehow that's not prekaryotic, it's called prokaryotic. But anyway, that's like before the nucleus. Eukarya are organisms that have a nucleus. Now, they can be single-celled, and I'm going to show you a lot of single-celled protists here. But domain eukarya has 4 kingdoms to it. In the first kingdom, Kingdom Protista, is what we're talking about today. There's 3 other kingdoms. I tell you what, I give you 5 points per team if you can name them. The 3 other kingdoms of domain eukarya. The 3 other kingdoms of domain eukarya for 5 points each.
Oh, yeah.
Other than Protista. Yes, he's correct.
I have a joke.
Green correct.
It's a biology joke.
White correct. What's the joke?
Did you hear about the mushroom who went to the party? I hear he was a fun guy.
Ah, blue correct.
This guy.
I've heard that before.
Purple gets 2 of them.
I didn't say I made it up.
Animals, it's fungi or fungi. Plantae, which are the plants. And animalia, which are the animals. So we're talking about this today.
Hey, what was your joke, Maya?
You hear about the mushroom who went to the party? I heard he was a fun guy.
So, the protists are basically organisms that, if you take some prokaryotic cells and you have them evolve where they have a nucleus, where they have organelles and such, you make them a lot more advanced, then you have a protist.
What is a plastid?
A plastid is an organelle that has pigments that can absorb light and such like that, colored pigments. Where'd you see that?
In the book.
Oh, okay. So let's say take this cell, a simple prokaryotic cell, You kind of watch how it changes into a eukaryotic cell. One thing it can do is it can grow kind of an internal system of membranes that fold off infoldings that come off the plasma membrane, and you have these infoldings that increase the surface area. What does that look similar to?
Endoplasm.
Right, Golgi.
It looks like a Golgi, doesn't it? Or what else? I'll give you a hint. They have it written right there. Yeah, it looks a lot like an endoplasmic reticulum, a Golgi vesicles. That's how they think that those evolved, from infoldings of the membrane of a prokaryotic cell. And then what if some of those infoldings surrounded the nucleus? Then you have a nuclear membrane. And if you remember, we already talked about the idea of endosymbiosis. There's a bacterium, and if you took it in and engulfed it, what do you have now? What's that look like?
Mitochondria.
Mitochondrions. That's how we think mitochondrions evolved. They used to be free living, and now they're found only inside cells. They were probably once free living bacteria. How do we know that they were once free living bacteria? If you look inside a mitochondrion, you'll find DNA in there. Mitochondrions have their own DNA. It's called mitochondrial DNA. So you basically have inside every cell in your body, you have little organisms living kind of on their own that are a part of you. And another thing those mitochondrions do is they'll grow and they'll get bigger, and then they'll divide in two, just like a bacterium would do. Some of the cells evolved to take in chloroplasts, which were also once free-living bacteria. And chloroplasts also have their own DNA, just like mitochondrions. And chloroplasts can do photosynthesis, you see. So the cells that took in chloroplasts are the protists that can do photosynthesis, and they eventually evolved into the plants. The cells that didn't take in chloroplasts evolved into the fungi and the animals.
So the protists that came before the plants?
It did. Protists came before all three of these. So the protists evolved into the other ones. So first you had the protists, and originally they were single-celled creatures. So they're just showing you that those mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA. They're about the same size as a bacterium. They're showing how big a bacterium is. A mitochondrion is about the same size as a bacterium. So we're pretty sure that chloroplasts and mitochondria were once free-living bacteria. That were taken in, and now we have this complicated cell. And those over time evolved into all the different organisms. So this is a huge evolutionary tree showing the evolution of simple prokaryotic cells into all the other kingdoms and phylums. And a lot of these groups we call protists. Protist is a huge kingdom that has all sorts of little organisms. But you can see there's the animals. There's the fungi. And there's a lot of animals around, and there's a lot of fungi around. Where's the plants? Do you see them up here? There we go. There's the land plants. But every other group on here is a group of protists. Protist is kind of like a junk drawer of organisms. You know, you have that junk drawer in the kitchen, you open it, and there's string in there, and there's little screws and tools and maybe some scissors, and my mom puts coupons in there, and there's just all sorts of stuff in this one drawer. That's what protists are. Protists are the junk drawer of biology. Any organism that's not an animal and not a plant not a fungus, we'll just call it a protist. And there's all sorts of different types, a bunch of very different types. Yeah.
What's the dotted line mean?
The dotted lines mean that these groups very likely evolved from this common ancestor, but they don't have any evidence of it yet. But they figured it had to come from somewhere. They just haven't located the fossil evidence. Yeah.
What's the difference between something that's colonial and multicellular?
We're going to get to that. That's a good question.
Okay.
So let's start just by looking at some of these organisms. And the book spends about a page talking about each one of these, but a lot of them I'm not going to go into that much detail. It wouldn't hurt you to read it if you had extra time. But this is a cool little creature that's a green algae that swims around. One thing that all the protists have in common, every protist has in common, it has a reliance on moisture, on moist habitat. All protists have to have it wet to be able to live. In this little green algae, it's called Chlamydomonas. It's a single-celled green algae, and it's got flagella, and it just swims around and does photosynthesis. It's got an eye spot. Eyes started to evolve in protists. None of these guys had eyes. But there are some protists who started evolving eyes. That's a little eye spot. It can tell lightness and darkness. And this thing will swim into the light so it can do photosynthesis and make food. Isn't that cool? Now, here's a colonial organism. So you're asking about colonial organisms. The simplest colonial organisms we know about are like this. This is called a volvox. And a volvox is a green ball of cells, and every little dot you see there is a cell. But they aren't single celled like these guys. I mean, they are single. They're what we call colonial. They're kind of in between a single-celled organism and a multicellular organism. They're not free-living single cells that live all by themselves. They live in a group with other cells. And they're joined together by a clear filament structures that you can't see, but they're all kind of joined together in a ball. And these little balls inside of them are called daughter colonies. And what these daughter colonies do is they grow. As the cells multiply, the daughter colonies get bigger. And once they reach a certain size, then they bust out from the main colony and go and form their own colony. So we call this a colonial alga, and it's a step on the way to a multicellular organism. Yes?
Can I go to the bathroom?
Yes. Great question. Oh, no. It's not a great question, but it's a legitimate question. How about that? It's needed to take care of bodily function. All right. What else we got here? No, you want to see a volvox moving around?
Yeah.
Isn't that fun? Let's see what he says. There's no sound? Because the sound's off, y'all. That's another colonial.
Colonies.
Those are called cynuras. They aren't photosynthetic, but these are.
Flagella produce the movement of these protist colonies. These gorgeous green globes are the colonial green alga volvox. You can see the beating flagella protruding from these cynura colonies.
It's exciting to you? Mm-hmm. These aren't considered multicellular creatures because if you knocked a cell off, it could survive on its own. It does better in a group. And so they live in groups. But this is on the way to becoming a multicellular creature. fungi, plants, and animals are almost all multicellular. Protists can be single cellular or multicellular, and you get some colonial forms too.
The open water.
We don't want that. We'll get to that in a minute. Here's a leaf-like multicellular algae. It's called ulva. It's also called sea lettuce. And they'll wrap this stuff around sushi and you can eat it. And this is a cool algae. It's called Spyro Gyra. You ever heard of that? Spyro Gyra is a filamentous algae. It's an algae where the cells, you'll have a cell. The cells look like bricks. You'll have a cell, and then another cell attached to it that way, another cell attached to it that way, and it'll keep going and form a long strand. Have you ever reached into a pond and pulled out some long green, stringy looking things? That's a filamentous green algae. And they live in ponds and they grow. And they reproduce with one another. Here's a couple of the filaments having sex with one another. Algae sex. Did you know that happened? Conjugation. That's what they're doing. Trading DNA and materials between cells. The chloroplasts are in a spiral form. See how it looks spiral there? That's why they call them Spyro Gyra. We're gonna be able to look at these under the microscope, by the way. I got a lot of these on order. And there was a band in the 70s that liked the sound of that algae, Spyro Gyra, so they made a band that got famous. There's their album cover, Spyro Gyra. They're named after algae. You ever heard of it before? My dad had one of their albums. That's how people looked in the 70s and 60s. A lot cooler than we are now. There's another type of green algae. It's called Chara. That's very, very similar to modern day plants. Plants evolved from green algae. This is some red algae. Sometimes algae have red pigments. So you got your red algae. This is a brown algae. Sometimes the algae look brown. Have you ever heard of seaweed or kelp? That's brown algae. And these things get real long, have real long tangled branches. I think we have time for a brown algae video.
Rocky coasts present plants with yet other problems. The rocks are firm enough, the perils come from the pounding waves and the surging currents. No flowering plant has evolved a solution to the difficulties of living here, but algae have. They have the simplest structure of all plants. They've never developed rigid stems, but in the sea, the water itself provides support. Their holdfasts grip the rock so firmly that if the current does rip them up, it's likely to be the rock that breaks, not the plant. They have long cable-like stems that are rubbery and flexible, but immensely strong. The great blades in which they manufacture their food are kept near the sunlight by huge gas-filled floats. Such algae can reach immense lengths. They can grow in waters almost 100 feet deep, but because they stream out in the current, their total length can be several times that. One species has fronds that measure over 300 feet, about as long as the tallest of land-living trees. These thickets can, with justice, be regarded as the marine equivalent of the terrestrial forests. Farther out to sea, the water becomes so deep that even these and still reach the light.
Huh. Pretty cool, huh? There's been divers known to get tangled up in those big fronds and get stuck and die down there. So whenever you're diving in the kelp forests, you got to carry a knife with you to cut yourself free if you get tangled. Yeah. It's a big thing in China to farm those kelp forests. So they go in there with big boats. They have special equipment for cutting the blades off and pulling them into the boat and storing them, and they eat them. You can eat brown algae. Have you ever had seaweed salad?
Yeah.
They serve it at the, what's the name of the, Fancy Q. They serve seaweed salad. Go order your seaweed salad, eat a little seaweed. It's great.
It's actually really
Oh,
fun.
it's fantastic.
We have little boxes of like dried seaweed in my house.
Oh yeah?
Delicious.
Is it good?
Delicious. Right?
The most numerous algae in the ocean are these diatoms. They're little glass-shelled algae, single-celled, that sit inside these little glass coverings. And they have oil inside of them, so they float. And they float near the surface, and they do photosynthesis. And when they die, the oil stops being made, and the thing eventually floats down to the bottom of the ocean. And the deposits of these things on the bottom of the ocean make thick, glassy sediment that sometimes is pushed to the surface by geological processes. And companies will take that rock, it's called diatomaceous earth, and they'll sift out all the little glassy particles, and they use them in different things. Have you ever noticed your toothpaste has a little crunch to it if you kind of bite on it a little bit? Those are the glassy shells of diatoms. Algae.
Why? What do they do?
It helps scrape your teeth when you're brushing. It makes it so that the paste isn't so smooth because you need some abrasiveness to get the gunk off your teeth. And this one right here is called a dinoflagellate. Dinoflagellates have little cellulose plates and flagella, and they swim around in the ocean doing photosynthesis. They're algae. They're making their own food, just minding their own business. And what can happen... Oh, there's a diatom. Oh, I thought... Yeah.
Is it actually two atoms, or is it just called a diatom?
No, it's just called diatom.
Okay.
It's not two atoms. An atom is way, way smaller than this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no. I meant like cell.
Yeah, it's single celled. If the dinoflagellates get in some water that has too much fertilizer in it, which can often happen if farmers fertilize their fields and it rains, the rain will run off and carry the fertilizer with it, and then the fertilizer will get in the water, and diatoms will get in that, dinoflagellates will get in that water, and they'll multiply like crazy, and they'll form what's called a red tide. You ever heard of a red tide before? That's a red tide. You see how the water looks red? And the thing about it is, each one of these dinoflagellates, let's go back and look at them, each one of these dinoflagellates can create a little bit of a toxin. And if you got trillions of them together, like you see right there, the water becomes toxic. And it can kill fish. This is a huge fish kill caused by a bunch of dinoflagellates. And it can get very dangerous. That's a big red tide right there. If you were to swim through that and swallow those diatoms, it'd kill you. People have died from red tides before. They'll shut down a whole beach because of a red tide. And as a matter of fact, the beach in Jacksonville was shut down just a few years ago from a red tide for about a week. And eventually they just die and dissipate, and the tides will come in and it'll wash them all away. Yeah.
So it's not actually the fertilizer killing fish, it's the stuff in the
Yeah, what happens, the fertilizer gets in there, it causes those dinoflagellates to multiply, and the dinoflagellates produce a toxin that's deadly.
So is fertilizer deadly?
The fertilizer's not by itself. I mean, it would be if you ate a lot of fertilizer, and you wouldn't want to do that. There's another red tide. Lots of pictures of red tide, dead fish. Look at that red tide around that marina. Now, some of these protists are animal-like, in which have to eat food. So you have your algae for your protists. You have your algae, which are your plant-like protists. They can do photosynthesis. And then you have what's called your protozoa, which are your animal-like protists. And then there's another type called your slime molds, which are your fungus-like protists. So the algae are plant-like because they do photosynthesis. And those algae led to plants. Your protozoans are animal-like because they have to eat. And the protozoans led to the animals. Evolved into the animals. The slime molds are fungus-like because they're decomposers. You would think the slime molds must have evolved into the fungi, but they're not sure about that. They think maybe the protozoans evolved into the fungi also, and that the slime molds are just kind of like fungi. We're not exactly sure about all that. The scientists are still working on it. They might already know, but I haven't kept up with it very well. But anyway, this is a paramecium. Have you ever heard of that? We're going to look at these under the microscopes in a week or so. They're little ciliates. They're protozoans with cilia, little hairs all over their body, and they swim around and eat. They're cute little animals. They're not animals, they're cute little protists. And this one's called stentor. It looks like a big trumpet. It's got cilia all around it, front of it. It's a single-celled creature. Very small, but you can see them under the microscope. There's one type of protozoan you should really know about. How much time do we have? This is called a sporozoan, and it's a protozoan. It's a protist that causes malaria. Have you ever heard of malaria? Mm-hmm. Malaria is the biggest disease in the world. It infects something like 100 to 200 million people a year, and it kills something like 1 million or 2 million every year. And what it is, it's a little protist that lives in the blood that reproduces by spores. And it's sucked up by a mosquito. This is called the Anopheles Mosquito. And if the Anopheles Mosquito bites someone who has malaria, it'll get spores in its body, and the spores go into the stomach of the mosquito and multiply there. And then the next person the mosquito bites, the spores will get into their blood. And once the spores are in the blood of a victim, it goes to the liver, and screws up those cells, and those cells start to die. And then it goes to the blood, and those cells start to die and burst, releasing spores that can be picked up by another mosquito bite. And so when you get malaria, you get these chills and fever, and it all kind of happens at the same time when all these cells are bursting. And so you feel really sick, and then you feel better for a while, and then you feel really sick again, and you can die from it. It lasts for days. Josh first.
Does the mosquito have to bite someone with malaria?
Yes. Has to bite someone with malaria and then bite you for you to get it.
Does the malaria affect the mosquito? Or?
It does not. The mosquito just does just fine. It just multiplies inside its body. So we call a mosquito a vector. It's something that transfers the disease from one thing to another. Yeah?
I think it's something like half of the people who have ever lived have contracted malaria.
That's right. And we don't have it in this country because we don't have this mosquito. That Anopheles mosquito only lives in hot temperatures. And it's not warm enough here for it. But because of global warming, temperatures are getting warmer, we're scared that we're going to get this mosquito back in the States, and then we might have problems with malaria again. The mosquito's range is moving northward up through Mexico, up towards us. Yeah?
Oh, how come it's only that type of mosquito?
Nobody knows. For some reason, this organism evolved to live inside that mosquito. And nobody really knows why, but that's the way it evolved.
What if a different kind of mosquito, like, sucks up blood with?
It won't survive in a different kind of mosquito.
Oh.
Just the Anopheles. Yeah.
Could they like get a virus or something that doesn't affect humans, but it affects those deadly little mosquitoes?
To try and kill the mosquitoes?
Shoot up everybody with that? Does that work?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know if that's ever been tried. One thing they do try to do is control these mosquitoes. They spray for them and stuff to try and prevent malaria. You also, if you live in Africa, where it's mostly prevalent, Africa and some parts of Asia, you sleep in mosquito nets. South America and around the equator is where it's at its worst.
Is this that disease where it helps to be a carrier of sickle cell?
Yes, if you're a carrier of sickle cell, you're immune to it. But then, of course, you can have kids that have sickle cell if you marry someone else that's a carrier. That's the problem with being a carrier of sickle cell. Yeah.
So, what is malaria? Is it a virus or a bacteria? Or
It's a protist. It's a protozoan. An animal-like protist. Okay, that's enough about protists. I think you got a little bit of a handle of what these things are. Oh, an amoeba. Have you ever heard of an amoeba? There's an amoeba. That's a famous protist. We're going to look at these under the microscope when we get them in for the regular bio class. I'm going to take you in there one day.